The War of 1812. July 1813. The war thus far. The 4th of July 1813 was probably not a happy one in the United States of America, and under cover of darkness, a small group of British and Canadian troops are about to make it unhappier still. During the early morning hours of July the 5th, 41 men, 34 Canadian militia, and 7 regulars from the 49th Regiment under Lieutenant James Fitzgibbons slip across the Niagara River and attack Fort Schlosser. Fort Schlosser. Always have trouble saying that one. Fort Schlosser, an old British fort located in present-day Niagara Falls, New York. The raiders captured the 11 men guarding the fort, as well as, quote, a 6-pound brass cannon, 57 muskets, 1.5 kegs of musket balls, 3 boats, 20 barrels of salt, 8 kegs of tobacco, and 16 tons of cannon shot. End of quote. What, no whiskey? My source? Wikipedia. Crossing the Niagara River, the British/Canadians are fired on by some American militia, but no one is hit. Following defeats at Stony Creek and at Beaver Dams, the U.S. Army has been reduced to hiding out in Fort George, which they captured back in May. There, the Americans find themselves continually harassed by the British, the Canadians, and their First Nations allies. Among the harassing actions are the Battle of Ball's Farm on July the 8th, where a mixed British, Canadian, and First Nations force under William Hamilton Merritt attempted to recover some medical supplies which had been buried on the Choros farm near Fort George during the retreat following the American invasion on May the 27th. A first attempt fails, but the second, on the morning of the 8th, succeeds, the native warriors lurking in nearby woods to watch over their allies. The warriors attracted the attention of the Americans, who dispatch a force of 500 men to drive them off, the natives falling back further into the woods. A body of 40 U.S. troops attempting to flank the warriors stumble into them instead and suffered 20 killed with 13 soldiers captured. In his book, The Flames of War, The Fight for Upper Canada, July to December 1813, Richard Feltoe reports a second skirmish in the same area on July the 17th, when, according to the words of one participant, Lieutenant T.G. Rideau of the 3rd York Militia, quote, a good many Yankees were killed. End of quote. A further action occurs July 11th, when Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Bishop led 240 British and Canadian troops across the Niagara River to Black Rock, now part of the city of Buffalo, New York. The defenders, 150 militiamen under Major Parmenio Adams. Parmenio Adams, gosh, what a great name. Parmenio Adams fled into the night, allowing the British to capture nearby Fort Gibson, where they spiked the artillery and seize some other cannon, as well as muskets, ammunition, clothing, food, and boats, before setting fire to blockhouses, barracks, the Navy Yard, and a schooner. Returning to the Canadian side, the British are ambushed by a mixed force of 230 men under Brigadier General Peter B. Porter of the New York militia. While the British escape with their plunder, they suffer significant casualties. 3 killed, including Lieutenant Colonel Bishop, 24 wounded, and 17 men taken prisoner. American losses are 3 killed, 6 wounded. According to Wikipedia, quote, "The British withdrawal was unduly delayed to secure several hundred prized bags of salt," end of quote. In spite of the loss of Lieutenant Colonel Bishop, the British are the clear victors, and are the clear victors in having entrapped the Americans in Fort George while they roam the country at will. Sometime in early July, Wikipedia gives the date as July the 8th, the final siege of Fort Madison, Iowa begins. Who is besieged? The U.S. Army. Who is attacking the fort? The Sauk and other tribes under the leadership of the famous chief Black Hawk. In the end, the army will abandon the fort sometime in September. Wikipedia says this was the only battle in the War of 1812 to take place west of the Mississippi. Is that really true? You tell me, dear listeners, in the comments. Staying in the U.S., Wikipedia's timeline of the War of 1812 states that on July the 26th, British forces under Henry Procter will abandon their siege of Fort Meigs, on the Maumee River near present-day Perrysburg, Ohio. The fort, which had been built as a strong base of operations by William Henry Harrison, is named in honor of Ohio Governor Return Meigs. Seriously, this is the second siege of the fort. During the initial attempt, the British had been unable to force the Americans to surrender, but did manage to inflict enormous casualties when Kentucky militia, part of a relief force, fell into an ambush by native warriors. Please see my May 1813 video for more information. This time, the British and their native allies attempt to lure the Americans from their stronghold by staging a mock battle meant to sound like an attack on a U.S. relief column. But the defenders see through the ploy and refuse to play, so the invaders have no choice but to give up and take their ball home. And their cannonballs, too. Moving south, July the 27th, we'll see what goes down in history as the Battle of Burnt Corn, a.k.a. the Battle of Burnt Corn Creek, which pitted the United States against the Creek Indians and is part of what is known as the Creek War. This action will take place at, you guessed it, Burnt Corn Creek, which is situated in the southern part of present-day Alabama. The details of the Creek Wars are outside the scope of this video and will be the subject of a future upload. But, similar to American attempts to expand into Canada, the U.S. will also attempt to seize land from Native Americans in the southeast, as well as drive the Spanish, British allies, from Florida. In this particular action, U.S. troops would surprise a party of Red Sticks, Creek traditionalists, opposed to the Americans who were returning from Florida, where they had purchased ammunition. The soldiers surprised the Red Sticks as they were bedding down for the night, forcing them to hide in some nearby swamps. The Red Sticks would have the last laugh, however. Seeing the Americans were busy looting their pack horses, they counterattacked, chasing them into the night. Both sides would experience a similar number of casualties. Creek warriors, 10 to 12 killed, 8 to 9 wounded. Americans, 2 killed, 15 wounded. July will end with a bang. Or is it a whimper? According to British historian Jon Latimer, on the 30th, a British force of around 1,000 men will raid Plattsburg, New York, where New York militia general Benjamin Moores, not to be confused with the paint people, assembles a 6-pounder and 300 men. 300 men who run away when the enemy lands. The British will destroy the arsenal, a blockhouse, and seize commissary stores. Commissary stores before returning home. Month's End also sees the second American visit to York. On July the 27th, an American attack force leaves the Niagara by ship and sails east along Lake Ontario to raid the British supply depot at Burlington Heights. Hampered by what author Richard Feltoe describes as adverse winds, the Americans arrive to find the position heavily reinforced by units such as the Glengarry Light Infantry, which has marched all the way from York. The American commander, Winfield Scott, I keep thinking I've been referring to him in some of my earlier videos as Winifred Scott. It's not Winifred Scott, it's Winfield Scott. The American commander, Winfield Scott, who is generally an aggressive officer, doesn't like the odds, so the fleet sails off to York instead, which is undefended. The Glengarrys, being at Burlington Heights, and the militia available in town, being on parole. Parole, i.e., being unable to take up arms until exchanged for an American POW. The invaders take away some military stores and destroy some private property before making a quick departure. I guess they didn't try to fly out of Toronto Airport. Thus, July sees action in Canada, the Deep South, and the Old Northwest. The Americans find themselves imprisoned in Fort George while the British and their native and Canadian allies roam free to harass them and send raiding parties across the Niagara River into the United States. It is a month of skirmishes and hit-and-run attacks. But in each of these actions, people are killed or maimed and private property destroyed. This is a truth we should never forget. If this is your first visit to 1812 channel, my name is Warren and I'm your host. I'm not a historian, nor am I an expert on the War of 1812. Instead, I'm a student wishing to learn about the conflict. Each month, for the roughly 3 years of the war, I will outline the major events. I will also review a book on the war. Or at least try to. Did I miss anything today? Any errors? Then let me know in the comments below. Stay tuned for my upcoming video on the Battle of Beaver Dams. When the barrage lifts, cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pics Here, that's PX Here, and they show various War of 1812 and Civil War scenes, while the music is the stirring prelude and action by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod.